So I wanted to kind of, as part of this conversation then, take Ignatius' experience, take this sort of the beginnings of Ignatian spirituality and say, how can we relate this to what we're doing today? So I just threw up a couple of questions. How does Ignatius' experience relate to the experience of young adults today? I mean, it's a 16th century versus a 21st century experience, but it's not totally separated. There are some commonalities. How does the spirituality and charis retreats rise out of Ignatius' experience? How, in your experience of doing charis retreats, have you noticed some of these things come up? And what does Ignatius' experience offer that young adults today might need more of, or even just some of? So, I mean, if people want to share a little bit from their own experience and answer those questions.
Well, he was vain, and we see that a lot nowadays. And he was invincible, which is still, young adults think that they're invincible. So some of the stuff is still...
Right, those who work in youth ministry know this very well. But even into young adults, I see this on the college campus all the time. They're not malicious. Teens aren't malicious. Young adults who are in college aren't malicious. Their world just sort of like revolves around them. They don't, it's not that they're inconsiderate or whatever. It's just that they don't think, to think outside that box sometimes. And sometimes we have to challenge them on that. Add to that something I'm going to say a little bit more about later. That's sort of the research that's been done recently saying, well, that there actually is now a second step between youth and becoming a young adult. But there's this thing called emerging adulthood people are talking about. So that's still kind of part of the process. So that people aren't becoming quote unquote young adults until their mid-20s now. That's what people are saying. Yes, sir.
I think maybe kind of coming off of that point also, his experience with the different desires, like his initial desire for fame, and I think in my experience like that, I can relate to that tremendously, and then realizing that there's a deeper desire and trying to connect with that.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I like to think that's what we're trying to do.
And Ignatius, one of the things I like about Ignatius is even when you look at the memoirs, like he talks about that experience of having his leg be broken and all that, and the bones sawed off, and he talks about the fact that he kind of brags about the fact that he didn't show any pain. Even when he's writing this so many years later, there's still some of that vanity there. There's still some of that kind of overconfidence, perhaps. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. I mean, could Ignatius have done what he did in founding the Society of Jesus had he not maintained some of that? So even in our faults, because Ignatius always talked about the dangers of pride, even in our faults, if there is something good that can come out of that as well.
I think the idea that God is in all things, that somehow young adults and college students, whatever, adults, have to have some sense of incarnational theology that Ignatius can offer and kind of tie in, that this life, your life is God's life within you. It's not separate. You're not. So I guess you don't have to go out and find God. God's not hiding out there somewhere for you to seek it. That God is present and always there.
Are you
isn't that
there?
great?
That's his book.
Mark had the book called Are You There? It's a cosmic book.
He didn't even have to plug his own book.
I think too, what I find that myself included, my peers, that I think the whole idea of seeking meaning out of suffering, and I think what we see in Ignatius, and I think one of the million ways Ignatius relates with young adults is here's this man that's laid up in bed thinking, plan B is here, what in the world do I do? And I think it was listed both as a joy and a challenge of the transition. Just this past weekend we spent a whole weekend at a conference. How do we find God in unsettled times? And that is so real. When you see young adults who've gone through college, they've got graduate degrees and they're saying, I should be able to get a job, or some of the major natural disasters that we've seen, I see young adults thinking all the time that very question, what do I do now? Even if it's minor, a relationship ended. Oh, that is not minor to some people. I don't mean that, but you know what I mean. Like you see that, and I think that's what's great is that you can tell Ignatius's story and share about how, God found Ignatius, and I mean, and worked with him, and look what happened. So I think that whole, like you said, Father Fagan said, the grace of Plan B is something that resonates strongly with young adults right now. So.
Yeah, because sometimes we have an experience of God, we have this ideal, like we're on the right track, and God's taking care of us, and we're doing what God wants us to do, and then something goes wrong that just throws us for a loop.
Right.
And how to recover from that. And that's a common young adult experience. And it can take us a while before we start to see that there's something else that God is doing in that. And to find ways to work with that, work in that space. Kathy?
I love kind of the passion in his initial conversion, which, we talked about experiences in youth ministry, just makes me think of so many like youth retreats and things like that, where suddenly they're just on fire and there's this great, enthusiasm, and I love how, he's like, what do I do with this now? He's like, I should have long hair. I should, I should live in a cave. That he does all these, ridiculous things of, oh, my life is different, it needs to be this. And he does that for a little while, and then it's like, no, how about this? But I think bringing that today is the wisdom of him not being afraid to take that step, to do that crazy thing, or to do something maybe less crazy, but for a short period of time, that it didn't have to be, that he was open to it being revised and himself being kind of perfected or, better.
Yeah, and as people who do ministry with young adults, right, sometimes the young adults we work with, they get so excited and they start to do things, and sometimes we want to say, well, hold on, no, don't do that. But sometimes that's what they're meant to do.
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't fit necessarily into our box, but it may be something that God is doing with them that we may not be able to see ourselves at that point. So there is kind of a discernment that happens on our part, is to sort of how much rope do we give them? How much sort of leeway? Like Becky was talking about before, how much should we let them share, and how much should they not share?
And with that too, I find, I don't know if y'all experience it, but I find a lot of young adults who are struggling. Like I always think of Ignatius, there was a time his family said, don't do this is awful. And there are so many young adults that, it blows me away, parents who are not supportive of their faith life. Like that they are these sole people in their family trying to walk this journey of faith, and they have mom and dads that, and I'm saying of young adults from 18 to 39 that it's not just college students I'm talking about, and that blows me away. But, and again, I always think of the story of Ignatius where his big brother is like, don't do this, like this is ridiculous, and again, it's another way I think his story relates.
Yeah, when I was in my early 20s, my sister and I both got really involved with the charismatic renewal. So we were doing all this crazy stuff in a lot of people's eyes. And my parents were a little concerned. They thought we joined a cult or something. But to their credit, they sort of they didn't try to intervene too much. They kind of let it happen and see what happened. And it eventually became, for me anyway, and I think for my sister too, became something that really helped us to reappropriate our faith in an adult way. And maybe got a little too excited about some stuff at the beginning and maybe a little over the top. But then we sort of incorporated it into a kind of a new way of being adult Christians.
Really quick, what I like is that he was perseverant. He had perseverance. He persisted, even though many doors got shut. We have challenges. He knew he had to do something, for God, or he had the calling to get closer to God. And sometimes we see it in the young adults, and sometimes once the door is shut, they just fall apart. Over there working, I tell my husband, I can't believe how many people come to the hospital, overdose, trying to kill themselves. It's just sad, and because they don't have that faith, they don't have the seed that nobody planted. It's okay, bad times are gonna come, but if you trust in God, that's your motivation that keeps you going. And look how far he went.
The rash of suicides we've seen amongst the young,
Yeah.
because they don't have any formation of conscience or any, you know, if tough, life gets tough, okay, I can just do X, and it's all done, and the pain goes away. And they have no concept of the others that are left behind that are in all kinds of pain.
And isn't it in the military right now,
It's
the
been-
suicide rate is very
In the
high.
last
and-
4
and-
months, it's been out of control.
Yeah.
We had just, on my base, we had a guy walk outside, grab his pistol, done, right there in front of everybody. I mean, so it's been actually a rash within the last 4 years. It's a straight spike.
And this is why I'm so glad that we're doing this initiative to out to the military.
Yeah.
I was given a talk in the Urinal Ministry a number of years ago, and Archbishop O'Brien was there, and at the time he was Archbishop of the military, and he said to me, and I hadn't really even thought about it before, he said, I have one of the largest young adult Catholic communities in the world.
We do.
Yeah.
I got them all one look. I got them 100. I got them within 55 miles of each other. More young adults, just to get through their asymmetrical attitudes and the thing and get them in is you're better off talking to that brick wall. But I mean, we're trying, and it's what we can do. But you're talking, the emerging adult and the youth and the young adult and the emerging adult and the adult. That doesn't apply for us.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of, if you join at 18, you're like thrown into
You're
this
in.
world
Yeah.
that a lot of them are not ready for, right?
I think part of the relevance also is Ignatius had this like foundational spiritual experience, like he had that felt sense of God's presence, and he always had that to go back to, and then he had other ones along the way, I think. But so when he had those disappointments, like he could still go back and say, well, I know God has a plan for me. And so, well, this isn't working, so I have to figure out what the other plan is.
Yeah,
Like,
and
trying to get help people have that experience, so that you have that as a foundation. So that, I mean, even on my worst days, like there's certain things I can point at and know that God's present and that God cares about me, and to try and open that up for other people in the military and civilians also.
And for me, that's why the examine is so important. Because the stuff just walks in my door. I can plan my calendar, but God shows up.
Yeah, that experience of knowing God present in your life.
And
It's so
then
important to what we're doing.
taking the time to not merely walk to the Blessed Sacrament room, but sometimes to walk down past the motorcycle school and to walk back, just so that I can say, okay, what's important right now?
Ignatius having a military background, discipline was a big thing in society. If you've ever been in the military, you know why he was that way. You know why if you look at the ranks that he has throughout his disciples, generally, you know what it is. So you said, discipline was always this thing. He probably developed that from within the military. So yes, we have to have a structure and overarching. So that was military organization.
And for
it touches
Ignatius, and some people think this is ironic, but for Ignatius, he thought the thing that Jesuits should be most distinguished by is their obedience.
Yeah.
Right. And that's as soon as you said that, I think that's literally beaten into us from day one. Day one. So, and so Ignatius, he if we could get it out fast enough, it would catch on. And I've been home for almost 30 days. I get back. I wasn't even supposed to make this. But again, not my plan. Somebody else's. I landed a month early, and now I'm back. And I mean, CJ wrote, laying on a vehicle in Afghanistan. Many times on Ash Wednesday, we got in just a really bad fight, and I was all chipper and jumping around through it. And everybody's like, "What is wrong with you?" I was like, "Just do what you have to do." And everyone, and I explained to some of them, and they sat back and like, "All right, he's lost it." So again, like a lot of people thought Ignatius was just crazy. They thought I was just crazy, and they're like, "Whatever, good luck, guy." And but a few got struck by it. Like, oh wow. And we read something. I would email CJ like, "I need information. I'm lost here. They're asking me questions." And I'd get it back a few days later, and stuff like that. But Ignatius, within our society and our young adults, it should speak relevance to them that we're all vain. You get in there. We want to be the fastest. We want to be the strongest. We want to be the quickest. We want to do the best at everything. We want to shoot better, run faster, and it gives us. There's hope. Like we can change. And
here's Ignatius with those soldiers, and they're ready to surrender because they're outnumbered.
No, he didn't.
And he's
have
like,
a
"No, we're
conscience.
going to keep going."